This is TWiT.
And I am very excited to be joined today by Patrick Hoffman of CNET, who joins us to talk about Samsung's Galaxy Unpacked event. Hello, Patrick.
Mikah, it's been a long time. Hi, how are you doing? I'm so excited to talk with you.
It is so good to see you back on the show. Thank you so much for being here. There's a lot to get through, so we'll just get started. It starts with the S25 and the S25 Plus. You see kind of these major smartphone manufacturers sort of launching some base models and then some fancier models and making sure they kind of cover the full gamut. I'm kind of curious, though, how do they compare to the models of yesteryear? What can people look forward to in this next set? And how does Samsung kind of sell it as, here's why you should upgrade to this phone?
Yeah, I mean, these are the important questions we ask every year with new phones or really new electronics at this point. And phones have kind of hit a point, not just with Samsung, but most manufacturers where they are just part of our everyday life. So a lot of those wild, swing back and forth years of design changes that we would see maybe 5, even 10 years ago, we don't see that as much. We see a lot more refinements, a lot more subtle things. So the S25 and S25 Plus, unsurprisingly, look almost identical to last year's phones, which look almost identical to the ones before that. But get this, last year's phones were really good. Like the S24 got a CNET Editor's Choice Award because it had outstanding battery life, it had great processing power, great software support. So, and one thing, it's like that old adage, like if it's not broke, don't fix it. But and another one's like, we want something kind of exciting. So that's where we have something like the Ultra, right? So the S25 is their base model. For $200 more, you can get the S25 Plus, which is the base model that says bigger. And then for $1,300, you can get the S25 Ultra, which is kind of like their premium flagship phone. Samsung does do foldables, but that's a whole nother thing, right? And what the Ultra does is it has the same processor, has the same RAM, and a little bit more storage than the regular model. But the big thing is going to be the cameras. The cameras are just a big step up in terms of quality. But then get this, all the software on all these is all the same. So that's where you get this weird thing where like that S25 model on paper seems like an incredible value. Now the S25 Ultra I have right here does have some physical changes. It might be hard to see on camera. The corners that used to be right angles that used to go back to like the Note series are curved. And the edges are more flat, a bit like the S25 and S25 Plus. So, but the big thing that separates all these models is this thing on the bottom, which is a stylus. Yes, because who doesn't love a stylus in your phone? And I'm going to have a hard time putting it back in the camera.
Yeah, that could be kind of difficult. So, yeah, I mean, this is, as you kind of mentioned, that is the big struggle that I think these companies have when it comes to announcing the next iteration, right? It used to be that you could make leaps and bounds improvements, but as we've kind of solidified around a sort of physical concept, it becomes more difficult to really set something apart. And so you just get these little bumps to everything. When it comes to, though, the Ultra, is the pen the main draw, or is there more to why you would go Ultra versus those standard models?
I mean, if you want a pen, you have one choice, right? But in other senses, like, so all of the phones, and this, let me just make sure I do a little promotion for Samsung. All the phones did get some refinements. They're a little bit lighter. The glass on the Ultra is more durable, and last year's glass was more durable before that. So if you're dropping it, that should be helpful. We haven't tested that yet, yeah, obviously. We just got it. The other thing is it carries over some of the neat features we had in last year's, like the Ultra has an anti-reflective display. So even as I'm doing it here, it would probably look a lot less like a mirror than if I do that. And as someone who does a tech podcast, I'm sure you'd appreciate if you had to film an actual device. It would be a lot easier to film because you don't have like the lights bouncing off it, or like, hey, you could see the cameraman. But in everyday use, that anti-reflection stuff, I think is such a big feature, and that's not new. That came from last year, but that's something that the other phones don't have. Yeah. And then they're saying that the battery life, even though the batteries are the same size as last year, the Ultra does have a slightly bigger battery than the S25 Plus, but that all the batteries get more battery life. So that will be curious, because last year's Ultra, did well for us, but it was really the smaller phones that did great on our battery tests. So I'm excited to do that. But the thing that we have not mentioned, the elephant in the room, is AI, right? And that's kind of where Samsung is hoping to kind of make things seem exciting and new. And there is some really interesting AI they talked about, but that's kind of what the upgrades we're looking at in terms of that. Now, it does have a new Snapdragon processor, as will all like major flagship phones from Android. And it has the Ultra also has a new ultra wide camera. So that is new. We have new hardware. Yay. First time in a while.
Nice. A new ultra wide camera. So yeah, let's talk about, we'll get to even more after we take a little break. But when it comes to these phones in particular, how much of the announcements for these devices were focused on the software side and in particular AI versus being about that hardware? It was another AI event, right?
It really was. I mean, if you tuned in for the first like 30, 40 minutes, you'd be wondering like, am I watching a developers conference? And what's going on here? Like, are they launching phones? Like, it was a lot about like, let's celebrate our partnership with Google. Let's celebrate our partnership with Qualcomm and these other companies. Let's also show off AI and list all the reasons people like the AI that we have and offer some new features. Now, the new AI, if you get past like just how much of it is, the takeaway is there's some really interesting ways some of this is getting better. So as opposed to being something I use AI for one particular task or one particular setting, I'm now able to use things where I can do kind of multi-step things for the device. Like an example like that you could try is like, hey, I'd like to go see a Warriors game, find the next Warrior game for me and add the date and time to my calendar. And it will do all that in one prompt versus having to do it in steps. Now, how well that will work across the system is interesting because a lot of the stuff they're showing are just Samsung-based apps. And really, not everyone's tied to Samsung that strongly. A lot of people use Google apps and other third-party apps. So it's this interesting thing. Like, there's some potential here. We're seeing some movement. But is it worth 45 minutes of talking about? I'm not sure. Technically, it probably really is. And for scientists and engineers working on it, it's probably like, yes, please, 3 hours of that, right? But for consumers, you're like, is it a good phone? Should I get a new one? Should I wait next year? Like, that's kind of the questions I think they ask.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was intrigued hearing about the aspect where it could do these multiple prompts all at once. But as you say, we got to see how that plays out, because if it does do what it says on the tin, that will be, I think, a really standout feature that can be very helpful. But again, there's a difference between showing demonstrations on stage versus actually seeing them in real life and testing them in that way.